Gonzo Education, Chapter 9, Part 2, the University of Texas. University students are obsessed with having a college experience. I remember hearing one of my roommate's friends bragging about how she maxed out her parents' credit cards on cocaine. Another guy made fun of my shoes and the fact that I hadn't seen the film Anchorman. I can understand getting upset because someone hadn't seen Pulp Fiction, but Anchorman? Their parents paid their bills and they had no idea what the term self made even meant. The money I gave my roommates for rent never saw the landlord. They spent it on new clothes they bought and the women's boutiques that recently opened up on the drag. The landlord of the place was a royal scumball who dropped out of UT 20 years earlier. He was about 40 and lived off his parents' money in his house his father owned. The guy lived in the basement and rented the main part of the house to hot co-eds he tried to have sex with for discounts on rent. One day he wanted to fight me for no reason besides the fact that he was drunk and didn't like me. The second I moved in, I had an unwelcoming feeling I was unfamiliar with. Every job I'd ever had, every new group I ever got involved with, and every person I ever lived with has always considered me exceptionally cool. Not just like, oh, Greg? Yeah, he's cool, he's okay. But more like, Greg, you are the coolest person I've ever met. So I didn't get why all of a sudden I was in a circle where I wasn't accepted. I don't give up easily, but after my first week at UT, I was actually thinking about quitting. For years, I wondered what went on in those architecturally stunning buildings on the 40 acres. But now that I was there, the only thing I could think of was going back to where I came from. I finally regained my composure at the end of my second week. I had a class that was canceled and used the unexpected free time to walk down to Shoal Creek. I hadn't been there in a while, and I went to the same spot Michael and I had camped at years earlier when we walked to Austin. Everything was covered with debris, but I was still able to excavate a few old soda cans and candy wrappers. I dug a little more and found the blanket we fought the winter off with. It was covered with mold, but I looked it, shook it, looked it over, and reminded myself it was there. Things got easier after I started to spend at least an hour at Shoal Creek every day. I made a little chill spot off the trail, up a cliff and behind a layer of tree and bamboo. This was my personal smoking spot for the remainder of the time I was in Austin and a student in Texas. I'd sit there, close my eyes, and listen to the sounds of nature, passing cars, and myself breathing. The only way I was going to make it through UT was with meditation and strong marijuana. I could be alone, gather my thoughts, and remind myself that college isn't everything. There's much more in life than the experiences you have at a university. I actually enjoyed going to the very large classes, which they called cattle calls. I got to sit in the back and keep to myself, pretending I was at a movie or paid for an expensive presentation of whatever it was the professor was talking about. It was the small classes that had 20 people or less that I hated. Everyone thought just because of how I looked that I was there for entertainment. It felt like they expected me to get up in front of the class and start doing stand-up. Looking back, it seems silly because much of it was in my head, coming from an irrational fear of public speaking. Every small class I was in, I told myself over and over, you can leave at any time. Nobody's forcing you to be here. And sometimes that's exactly what I did. If I didn't get along with the professor, or maybe a couple frat boys kept trying to trip me when I walked by, or sometimes if I just didn't feel like coming back, I'd take my chances, hope the teacher didn't fail me, and take the easy way out. The first class I abruptly stopped attending was during my first semester, a science lab with about 30 people. The room could have doubled as a Hollywood set for High School Musical. Students worked closely with each other at lab tables, and everyone was supposed to have a lab partner, but no one ever sat by me, so I always had to be added as a third to another group. Oh, gotta find a partner for the guy in the back, again, the professor said. He'd usually put me with two former high school football players who had recently arrived at UT and loved it. One of them claimed he was the king of high school. The other one told me how much he loved going to college because it was like high school on steroids. Apparently, I considered higher education something more dignified. I'd seen enough of the world to know this wasn't normal behavior. I wasn't going to pretend I was in high school. On the first class day, the instructor, who was a few years younger than I was, said he was a cool professor and wasn't going to fail anyone. I did my best to relate to my peers and spark conversation, but after a few weeks, I gave up, took the professor on his word, and never went back. First time I ever got a D. I didn't think I had anything in common with these people. The high price of tuition makes sure everyone is in the same age group and from the same economic background. There's not enough federal financial aid to cover tuition, books, and living expenses at any major U.S. university unless you're over 25, military, or ward of the court. And once again, according to the university website, only 5% of students in 2006 were over the age of 25. I've heard people say they put themselves through college, but just because you made an insurance payment on the SUV your parents bought you, or you paid a few phone bills, does not qualify you to use that term. The fact is that there are very few self made people left in this world, but plenty of people who claim to be. Most of the self made people in the United States now are black, Mexican, Filipino, Korean, Eastern European, and usually every race and ethnicity except white. There were things I just couldn't understand about my peers. I had never been around so many straight men interested in what type of shoes I had on. I hadn't had anyone ask me what my parents did for a living since I was 10, and I don't remember ever seeing an adult female that wasn't a porn star with a huge pink bow in her hair. My whole time at UT, I'd get dozens of letters addressed to the parents of Gregory Brandt. After everything I'd been through, it was insulting. I didn't mention anything about any parents. I never received any of these kind of letters the whole time I was at ACC. In retrospect, I let a negative mindset take over and made myself out to be the victim. I distinctively remember walking around campus, shit kicking the ground with an angry look on my face. I only saw the differences and didn't bother to see if I actually liked anyone. UT was nothing like I thought, so I let pity take over until it killed me. I even stopped talking to drag rats. I wouldn't look in their direction and became one of those jerks who ignored their requests for change and act like they don't exist. I became someone who I didn't recognize. By the end of the first month, I stopped attending two of my classes because of nerves and mistreatment by other students. It took a lot out of me. I was beat. It wasn't all in my head either. There were a few times the professor actually had to ask for eyes and attention away from me and back on his lecture because of the fully grown assholes who'd menacingly stare at me for the whole class, giving me a look like, "What are you doing here?" My two roommates and their stupid little friends were the epitome of what I didn't like about UT. By the time my 27th birthday came, I knew I had to get out of there. The girl's parents were asking for a security deposit, I was behind on rent, and I loathed my roommates and scummy landlord. If I was going to go to UT, I knew I couldn't bring the entire bullshit home with me. I was going to act like these were the best years of my life, because they obviously weren't. Toward the end of my West Campus stay, my roommates tried to diversify their group of rich kids by bringing home street people. In particular, a Charles Manson wannabe they found on the drag. He'd recently been released from prison, not jail, for a violent felony. The cross-eyed lunatic wanted to start a cult and attack rich white bankers. I guess he didn't understand that the rich white bankers the Looney Tune was talking about were basically these kids' parents. He tried to hypnotize everyone and take control of the house with his cult bullshit. But I'd seen the scam before, so none of it rubbed off on me. The naive college kids took one hit of acid and were like putty to the creep. I'd usually spend my weekends at Adam's housing projects, getting some air and totally forgetting about my painful college experience. One Monday morning, I got back to West Campus House and saw that Charles Manson had moved all my stuff out of my room and into the yard. He took over my room and thought I'd want to fight, but I took the high road, grabbed what I wanted, and never saw them again. I went back to Adam's project and told him what happened. Adam said I could sleep on his couch as long as I let him use my car to deliver papers. Michael had apparently given the idea that it was a swell job. "You want to do what?" I asked him. "Newspapers," he said in his New York accent. "I want to throw papers." "It's the hardest job. You don't get a day off and and you don't even know how to drive." "Hey, they gave me a license," he yelled. The Texas Department of Public Safety had recently given Adam a driver's license, but I taught the New Yorker how to drive and knew he drove terrible. He didn't have a car, but he wanted to use mine to make money and gave me an ultimatum. "If you want to stay here, you gotta let me use your car to throw papers." I figured this was probably going to get in the way of my early morning classes and pile up homework, but I didn't have an option. I refused to live in my car while I was going to UT. My first night there, Adam had already set up the gig. The manager at the circulation department said he could use my car, but I had to be there delivering with him every night. At 2 a.m. sharp, we drove to the newspaper warehouse. I'd seen it before during my previous stints as a carrier, but I'd never been so tired. My first semester at UT was one of the hardest things I ever did, and waking up in the middle of the night to throw papers with Adam made me feel like I had Down syndrome. Me, Adam, and the guy training us bagged a few hundred papers before filling my back seat up to the windows. Adam was to drive while the trainer sat shotgun and gave directions. I lay in the back on top of the hundreds of bagged papers with my head touching the ceiling. My job was to hand Adam papers while the trainer shouted out house numbers. Adam was asked to drive, keep his eyes on the road, and toss the correct paper, all at the same time. He was bound to fail, and I should have said something and ended the whole shebang when I noticed he could barely get in the car out of the warehouse parking lot. They gave Adam a ghetto route with hardly any customers. We didn't even last an hour. The trainer shouted out a number and Adam tossed the paper at the wrong house. Then the trainer told Adam to put the car in reverse and fix the mistake. But Adam didn't understand that you gotta wait for the car to stop moving before you switch it from the D to the R. He switched gears going about 20 miles per hour and you heard the transmission make a horrible cracking sound. The trainer got out, looked under the car, and laughed. "We're not going anywhere," he said. "Your tranny's screwed." I knew it cost more to fix the transmission than the car was worth. Adam didn't even apologize and blamed my Mazda for costing him the job. Someone came to pick up the guy training us, and Adam and I walked back to his public housing projects. He didn't say anything when we got back. I thought maybe he felt guilty about breaking my car, but then he tossed down a few drinks and started shouting like a New Yorker in rush hour. "I was going to let you stay here," he said, "if you let me use your car. And now that you don't have a car, I don't want you to stay." My heart raced. I jumped up and got an inch from his face. "After everything I've done for you," I said, looking at him coldly. He didn't repeat himself, and we just stared each other down for a few seconds before I walked away. Fighting wouldn't have solved anything. I left his apartment an hour later and got on a bus to school. After school, I called Michael and told him what happened. We hadn't been talking much since I stopped delivering the paper with him, but he didn't like Adam, so I found us a common enemy. Michael lent me some cash, and I had the car towed to Adam's projects. But Adam came outside and said I couldn't park it there, so I spent the next 3 hours pushing it through his projects and out onto the ghetto main street. It was the scariest street in town and the last place you'd ever want to sleep in a broken down car. If my car worked, I could at least use it as a weapon. The pavement was covered with broken glass from all the nightly break-ins. As soon as the sun went down, you'd hear gunshots, glass shattering, and cries for help in the distance. After my car parked, it was only early afternoon, so I locked it up and took a bus back to campus. I went to the Fine Arts Library for the first time. Despite all the chaos going on in my life, I felt so much better the second I got there. I've never had access to so many books in such a pleasant setting. The season's first cold front arrived that afternoon, so I was also happy to find a safe place indoors. Looking for my pen. I walked around the library clearing my head and noticing practical things that would definitely help my situation, like top-of-the-line computers, access to cheap printing, and plenty of room to linger about. I even found a secluded corner to curl up and take a nap in. When the library closed, I still hadn't figured out where I was gonna sleep, so I walked up and down the drag looking at where my favorite hangout spots used to be. The Barnes and Nobles was no longer open. There was a sushi restaurant and sound exchange old building, and Einstein's and La Fun Arcade had shut their doors and sold their machines. My favorite coffee shop, Quack's Coffee, was now a high-end woman's boutique with scantily clad mannequins glaring down at me. The wind picked up and the temperature dropped, so I walked to Adobe Mall and sat outside the movie theater looking out the second-story window. There was no one inside. Everyone had heard the cold front coming, and even the drag rats found a hole to crawl on. I didn't want to give up. I didn't want to stop going to UT just because I was homeless, but I had a full day of classes the next day and nowhere to sleep. I sat in Dobie Mall and tried to calm my nerves. I could either go to Shoal Creek, crawl under some limestone rocks and shiver the night away, or I could take the bus to my car parked in the ghetto. My car would be warmer, but it was parked in front of the most dangerous set of government housing projects I had ever seen. I got on the bus and headed to my car. My stop was the last stop, and the only other person still on the bus when I got off was an elderly black lady. Seeing her made me feel better. I got off the bus after midnight and made my way through gang-infested neighborhoods, overcharged with broken glass and fresh puddles of blood, until I found my tiny car. I lived in a broken-down car in front of Mom's house years earlier, and at the time I didn't think it could get any worse. It can always get worse. I got in the back seat, rolled up the windows, locked the doors, and slept like a rock. When I got up the next morning, 3 young black dudes were knocking on my window, yelling at me to wake up. They wanted to know why I was sleeping on their street. I made up some story about getting kicked out and having to spend the night outside, and one of them interrupted my story and impolitely asked for my wallet. I refused to give it to them. I told them I didn't have any money and even showed them the inside of it. If they wanted my ID and social security card, they were going to have to take it from me. I raised my voice to let them know I wasn't backing down, and they decided I wasn't worth it and sauntered away. While I was taking off in the other direction, heading to school, I saw a red-tailed hawk fly above me with a pigeon clenched in its talons. Great neighborhood. I was hungry, and the last place you want to go on an empty stomach is a college campus. So instead, I walked to the closest social services office and applied for emergency food stamps. I've been putting it off for the main reason that I didn't want to admit to anyone that I went to UT but still wasn't smart enough to find some food. While I was walking to the EBT office, I pretended I wasn't a UT student and that I didn't have that kind of pressure. I walked by the neighborhood I used to live in with Dick before I even set foot in college. I imagined myself the same carefree person I was back then. By the time I got to the food stamp office, I laughed about my situation. I reminded myself that out of 50,000 students at UT, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one waking up in the back seat of a broken down car, dusting off my shoulders and walking 3 miles just so I could apply for food stamps and not starve. The food stamp office wasn't busy. They saw me right away, and every employee was surprisingly helpful, totally different from the last time I applied. They heard my story, qualified me in an hour, and gave me a Texas Lone Star card that had almost $200 worth of food money on it. I immediately went to the gas station and filled up on junk food. I went to all my classes the next day with pockets full of snacks and candy. On the way back, I stopped by a grocery store and stocked up on some non perishables for the back seat of my car. Things at UT weren't going how I pictured they would, but at least I wasn't going to starve. I woke up early the next morning, had a big breakfast, and set off to school with a better attitude. On my way to the bus stop, I was stopped by a local TV news crew doing a story about the plague of robberies and murders that had swept across that particular neighborhood. They asked if I was a college student if I lived in the area. I told them I went to UT and that there was a lot of crime in the neighborhood. I didn't tell them I was homeless and sleeping in a broken down car a couple blocks away. I should have. It would have been the story of the year. Having money for food put me in a better mood. It was one less thing to worry about. I spent that evening in the Fine Arts Library watching movies and listening to Mozart records. For the next few weeks, I stuck with the same routine. I go to most of my classes during the day, with intermediate smoking sessions at Shoal Creek, and hang out in the Fine Arts Library until closing. At the end of the day, I take the city bus across town to my busted down car, parked in the projects, crawl in the back seat, and try to get some sleep. I focused on what I had: free bus fare, plenty of food, and all the resources I could check out at UT libraries: books, DVDs, CDs, records, and even tape recorders and video cameras. I still had to continue going to my annoying classes, but other than that, I felt things were slowly getting better. I reminded myself that I could easily be in the same position, homeless, and not be enrolled in one of the country's top universities. I only went to my car at dark, so I was forced to spend more time walking around campus in the drag, especially on weekends. One Saturday, I ran into an old friend named Chris. Chris was from the backwood hillbilly area of East Texas, and even though he'd been in Austin a few years, he looked like he just stepped out of the forest back home. He had long, straggly hair that he never combed or washed, dirty blue jeans, which he also never washed, and he was always unshaven. Chris was a great storyteller, especially if you got him talking about growing up in the East Texas wilderness. He'd go off about living off the land, picking berries, hunting rabbit, and eating squirrel with his father. He had a deep East Texan accent, and he was very open and friendly. He didn't come off as intelligent, but after you got to know him, you realized he was a lot smarter than he let you believe. Chris originally moved to Austin to win back his girlfriend, Summer. She got into UT with a scholarship and broke up with him days before she left their small Texas town. Chris couldn't take it, and just like any good man, he hitchhiked to Austin and lived off the streets near campus with drag rats until she gave in and they got an apartment. When Chris saw me that day, he looked me up and down, which wasn't typical of him, and he invited me to take a shower. I hung out at his apartment with him and his girlfriend, smoked their weed, and watched college football, even though they hated football. I didn't think they had any company in a while. I don't think they had any company in a while, so I was glad to keep them entertained. I talked about how I'd been sleeping in the back of my car in front of Adam's government housing project while going to school at UT full time. It's gonna get down to freezing tonight, Summer told me. You can sleep on the couch. It's not much, but it's warmer, there's more space, and you have a less chance of getting stabbed, Tommy. For some reason, they called me Tommy. The next morning, Chris and Summer said I could crash on their couch indefinitely. Kindness like this is rare, and I was grateful to finally have somewhere to chill at the end of the day. Their place was in Hyde Park, which has more young professionals and artist types not even associated with UT. It's nothing like the freshman filled fraternity packed trash dump known as West Campus. I had more time after I moved in with Chris and Summer. When you're homeless, your days are filled with making sure you're clean, warm, and don't smell too bad. That's if you already took care of your main human priority, an empty stomach. I was homeless and going to UT, so I had to stay clean while at the same time keep up with my classes, do my homework, and deal with schoolyard bullshit. After 2 weeks on their couch, I got a job at a computer tech center in Dobie Mall. I'm nostalgic and I have a history with Dobie. It was the first place Michael and I went to when we initially came to Austin for our sister's graduation. 5 years later, when we walked to Austin from San Antonio in January 2003, Dobie Mall kept us from freezing. I probably spent thousands of hours sitting in their food court and looking out the second story window on the drag. When I die, if I become a ghost, I figure I'll haunt the first 2 floors of Dobie. When the IT place opened, I was one of the first to apply. I never owned a computer before, but I somehow passed their efficiency test and they hired me full time. We took calls from people deep in West Virginia, so they usually wanted to know how to check their email or where the on button was located. I didn't know half as much about computers as my coworkers did, so if I didn't know the answer to someone's question, I just let them handle it. If they were too busy, then I put the customer on hold and surf the web until they hung up. Sometimes I'd give callers crazy instructions and the office would laugh. By the time finals started, I'd stopped attending half of my classes. I was lucky some instructors let me turn in late work and do makeup assignments. I had to talk my way out of a couple failing grades, but I survived my first semester, and I was due another financial aid check in January. I didn't have much hope of actually graduating and getting a degree in journalism, but I was proud to have survived one of the hardest times of my life. Chris and Summer didn't ask for money and encouraged me to save what I made. I couldn't have had better friends at the time, and I don't think I would have had the courage to keep going to UT without them. Summer had been going there for almost 3 years and had a better idea than anyone what I was going through. They're not all stuck up frat boys and sorority girls, she told me. There's some really interesting people. You just have to look closer. You're just seeing what you choose to see on the surface. She was right. I was so upset about how different I felt that I didn't keep an open mind. I turned it into me against them thing, which led me to not take advantage of or even notice all the interesting people and opportunities that walked right in front of me every day. A week before Christmas, Michael called and said he got kicked out and was living in his car. It was freezing outside, so I told Chris and Summer about it, and they invited him to sleep in the corner of their living room. He got there in an hour, ate something, and went to sleep. Now there were 4 people and 3 cats living in a one-bedroom apartment, but surprisingly, everyone got along. I slept on the couch, Chris and Summer slept in the bedroom, and Michael slept on a pile of dirty clothes that smelled like cat piss. Mornings were hectic, with everyone getting dressed, using the bathroom, making breakfast, and feeding the cats. Summer and I walked to school early in the morning and went our separate ways when we got there. While we were in class, Chris and Michael smoked pot and watched PBS children's shows. The month off I had for Christmas gave me time to reflect. I reminded myself that I was still the same person whether I was a student at UT or picking up trash on the side of the freeway. I told myself to relax. I didn't have to be there. I could be easily doing this whole back to school thing for fun or just to see what college is actually like. Pretty good, this. I worked as much as I could during winter break. We got to make our own schedule, so I signed up to work on Christmas Eve day, Christmas Eve, and Christmas Day. One reason was for holiday pay, but I also couldn't think of a better place to spend the time. It gets old being alone every year at home in front of the TV on Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I met with W Mall security guard, and he told me I was going to be by myself in the mall the whole night. I thought, are you guys crazy? But played it off and acted like a responsible adult, agreeing with everything. It was harder too because I was basically in shock that I was going to have the whole place to myself. Where some might have been sad or depressed being alone and working on Christmas Eve, I was ecstatic and in the best mood I'd been in all year. Apparently, people in the backwoods of West Virginia don't have computer problems on Christmas because I didn't get a single call all night. I turned on the radio and propped open the office door so I could hear the phone if it rang. It didn't, so I spent the first couple hours sitting in the food court looking out my favorite window. It was a cold Austin night and I didn't see anyone on the streets below. Christmas Eve is the only night of the year where there's no one on the drag. It was the best Christmas I had in years, dancing around my familiar mall. I could have easily been a drag rat that slipped inside an open window and found himself in one of the largest dorms in the United States. At that moment, I realized that even if all of UT didn't want me, if the whole city of Austin didn't care about me, and even if the entire world I had wished I hadn't been born, I was here and not going anywhere. For one night, I owned the mall. Out of hundreds of thousands of people that had been there before, I wasn't allowed to let any of them inside. Even if Michael Dell knocked on the door, wanting to get something out of his old dorm room, I couldn't let him in. I went behind the counter at Nikki's Pizzas and gave all of my imaginary friends my best Italian accent while I pretended to toss dough in the air. When I got bored with that, I went to the candy store and looked in the windows, briefly concocting a plan to bend a coat hanger that'd be long enough to slip under the door to steal some sour straws. A little bit later, I vandalized the Armed Forces recruiting station for almost convincing Michael to fight in Iraq. By the end of the night, I was back in front of my favorite window, arranging a makeshift bed from random cushions I found throughout the mall. I got comfortable and looked out into the dark Austin night, knowing how rare this experience was. Go back to the same mall and the same window many more times, but never like this, on Christmas. I looked out the window onto the drag. I wasn't celebrating Christmas, I was celebrating my resourcefulness, my originality, and my ability to take whatever's thrown at me with a big smile. Nothing could bring me down as long as I stayed positive and endured. It'd been a rough few months, some of the hardest I ever had, but I was alive and knew if I could get through my first semester at UT, I could get through anything. I lit my candle, took a hit of weed, and breathed a sigh of relief. When the clock hit midnight, the Jeff Buckley version of Hallelujah fittingly played on the radio in the background. That's the end of chapter 9, the second to last chapter in Gonzo Education. That's probably one of the best parts of the book, the end of chapter 9. You know, I'm my toughest critic, but yeah, that's really great. The end of chapter 9 is really great with me and Doberman, and it really puts things in perspective. But right now, you can get this book for free on Kindle. It's like $5-6 on Amazon. Help this going. You know, like there's so many people out there that are getting success, and they don't have any talent. I don't have a computer. I'm unable to edit any of these videos. But I made this whole channel with just my abilities, my ability to read, my ability to tell jokes, and my talent. So if you watch any of these videos, if you watch this video, click the thumbs up button, write a review on Amazon, and send this to one person and have them send this to one person, because you know, it's good if somebody, like, you know, gets successful with their merits, what they're good at. You know, not just because they knew the right person or they had the right daddy. You know, like seriously. So give me a chance. You know, if you watched all this way through, keep watching. Click the thumbs up, click the subscribe, and more importantly, send this to one person.